in the College of the Barbs is a Bible copy table, a place where the students would have painstakingly, by hand, written the Bible out from beginning to end. You see, the Bible was very important to the Waldensians. They had it in their own language. It formed a basis for congregational worship. There was also societies of young people that would meet together and would commit large parts of the Bible to memory.
You're hearing audio from the Lineage Journey YouTube video series, which traces the history of Bible-believing religious dissidents through the centuries. The presenter and executive producer of the series is Adam Ramdin, an Adventist youth pastor from the north of England. My interview with him via Skype starts straight after this.
This is Signs of the Times Radio with Kent Kingston.
Could you tell us a little bit about the origin of that Lineage Journey series that is on YouTube? And you're still dropping at least a video every week. So how did it all happen? How did it all begin?
I had quite humble beginnings, and in the sense that we never planned for it to be what it is now. It started in London, actually. I was at the British Museum with a friend of mine, Clive Coutet, and he had been mentioning to me in the past that he always wanted to kind of do some films or videos on the Reformation because there was nothing that was of good quality online. Okay. And he said to me, the British Museum lets you use a tripod. Maybe we should come back here and just film a few clips with some of the historical artifacts, and maybe we can go to John Wesley's house in London too. And I said, well, that sounds good. Why don't we film in Oxford and Cambridge as well? Because I visited those sites quite a few times, and maybe Lutterworth and Edinburgh. And we just the conversation just kind of evolved, and we just said, let's do that. And then somewhere along the line, and I don't know who it was, we kind of had the idea, well, let's film a chronological journey and travel to different places in Europe as well. I mean, I can't remember if it was him, he can't remember if it was me, but it's just the idea just kind of organically grew.
Okay. So did this have anything to do with the fact that, last year was the 500th anniversary of, Luther kicking off the Reformation in Germany? Was that a catalyst in any way?
Yeah, that was definitely in our minds, but I don't know if it was part of the initial, very, very first idea. I think after the idea grew, we're like, next year's Reformation 500. Let's plan something for October. We thought let's start something in January and just plan it, the whole year. So we've got some momentum by the time we get to October.
Yeah, well, it's, very, very good timing, whether it's just a happy accident or God's leading in some way. It worked out very well.
Yeah, I mean, really, God has to take the credit for this, because it wasn't like sometimes you have ideas that you're sitting down at a committee table, you have a strategic planning session and you're brainstorming and all that stuff. But it wasn't really any of that. It just kind of grew from an idea and just went from there.
Yeah. Are you personally interested in history and church history in particular? Is it, sort of been something you've studied privately?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I like history, and at least the Reformation sites in England, like Oxford, your Lutterworth, Edinburgh, St. Andrews. I've visited them on numerous occasions and always had a personal interest in that, always trying to find books on the Reformation and history. So it was always a personal kind of pleasure interest. So some of the research I didn't have to research too much for, at least for some of the episodes last year, but some of them it was areas that I hadn't read in too much. So yeah, it was something I do personally enjoy and still do.
So the English Reformation, I guess you're talking about what people like William Tyndale or John Wycliffe, those people who translated the Bible into the the English tongue for the first time. Are those some of the people you focused on in your series?
Yeah, we did William Tyndale, we did John Wycliffe, and I mean John Wycliffe, his church in Lutterworth is only about 45 minutes from my house, so I've kind of visited that on numerous occasions, so was familiar with that one. We also did the Oxford Martyrs, Hugh Latimer, Nicholas Ridley, and Thomas Cranmer, and we featured them as well. So we tried to kind of cover early English reformers as well as later ones, and we did the Celtic Church as well. So we went up to Scotland and visited Iona and and Wales and some other places of interest to the Celtic Church.
So what is it about the English Reformation that gets you excited? Like, are there particular themes that emerge from these people's lives that get you excited?
William Tyndale was someone that I hadn't really researched too much, but, he's probably one of my favorite reformers now. I mean, it's a common theme you find throughout, I think, most of the reformers, and it's that willingness to stand or to live by a principle as opposed to, just live for a paycheck or live for, some of the earthly things that people live for today. They had a conviction that was bigger than their own life. And I think that's a recurring theme you find throughout the Reformation as a whole, in particular, like with William Tyndale or the Oxford Martyrs. You see that again and again. And to me, that's inspirational, that people would believe in something so much, they believe in it and value it more than their life itself.
Yeah, sure. Now, you are a pastor who focuses on working with young people there in the north of England. And often when we think of young people and history, it's like, oh, yuck, old, boring stuff, battles and dates. And do you attempt to sort of involve young people in your enthusiasm for history? Do you think it's important for young people to understand history?
I think it's very important. And like you say, the stereotype is young people aren't interested in history or it's kind of boring to them. And I think in many ways that's down to the way we've told the story of history. It's memorize these dates and memorize these places. And we haven't really looked into the stories behind the stories or the why it matters. What's the point of kind of studying it and bringing that out? So I think it's very important, with this series of lineage that we've done. It's important for us today, in understanding our identity today, it's very important for us to know where we've come from and to know that whatever religious beliefs we have today or spiritual beliefs, they haven't formed in a vacuum, but there's a legacy that's been laid down from people in the past. And I think when we understand what that legacy is and we understand what our heritage is, it gives us a deeper appreciation of who we are today. And so I think it's understanding history in the context of who we are today, I think brings it more to life. And for young people, I think that resonates.
And I guess a lot of those reformers, well, some of the stories of those early reformers and the people who, were followed their movements were young people, weren't they? And they, some suffered and died and were even martyred for their faith. So, there's a connection there, isn't there?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when we look at pictures of reformers or paintings of them, they're often black and white or they're old pictures. And I don't know, growing up as a young person, I'd look at those pictures and just think, well, they're old. These guys were old. But, when I was researching and going through, okay, well, they were born on this year. They did this significant action on this year. They died. I was like, oh, wow. They were like in their 20s and their 30s and maybe their 40s, but they were definitely doing significant things in their younger years. And that really kind of stood out to me, that over and over again, the prominent reformers like your Martin Luthers or your Calvin, John Calvins, William Tyndales, they did their significant actions that history remembers them for in their younger years.
Wow. Hey, I'd like to focus a bit on the Waldenses today with you, if we could, Adam, because we actually have an article appearing in this month's magazine, the April Signs of the Times. It's an excerpt from the book Unshakeable Faith by Mark Finley, and our listeners will actually give them a chance to get a hold of a free copy of this book for themselves. I'll give you some details about that at the end of the program. But yeah, he wrote this. One of the chapters in his book does focus on the Waldenses, and obviously the Lineage Journey video series, which is there on YouTube, free for anyone to check out. Also, there are a couple of episodes there where you look at these issues. Can you just outline the story of the Waldenses for us? Just give us a thumbnail sketch of the history so that we know what we're talking about.
The Waldenses were a group of believers that were based in northern Italy. And they were given different names over the years that were kind of given to them by others. The word Waldensians, people often believe, comes from Waldenses, beginning with V, and it literally means like people of the valleys. And initially they kind of would have been based in northern Italy, Milan, Torino, but as persecution grew, they had to kind of leave those bigger cities and retreat more into the mountains. And as time went on, they would kind of retreat more and more up into the mountains, and they would live up there,
Okay.
for generation after generation.
Okay, this begins in what, about the 1100s? Is that around the date when they really kicked off? Because that's sort of like 400 years before the Reformation. Like these guys are very much pre-Reformation, aren't they?
It was definitely, they definitely were pre-Reformation, and they were around several hundred years before the Reformation, as we know it in the 16th century. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What impresses you about their story in particular?
Two things, I think. Number one, how long they withstood persecution and how long they maintained the faith that had been handed down to them over the centuries. And I think of all the people groups you find, like, you've got the Celtic Church in Britain, you've got the Waldenses, you've got the Albigensians in France. The Waldensians kind of held out the longest against what they saw as, corrupt practices coming into Christianity. So to me, it was their stand for the truth and their stand on God's word the longest. And number two, I think, though, they weren't just the hermit people. They lived in the Italian Alps, but they would train their young men and women to go out as missionaries around Europe. And they had to be undercover missionaries, so they would go to the leading universities of Europe. They would take, pages of the Bible that had been sewn into their jackets, and they would go as kind of undercover, like Secret Service missionaries. And so they weren't just kind of, let's retreat to the mountains and be monks, but the mountains was a place of refuge, but also a place of training. And then from there, they would travel out and be missionaries. And I think maybe that's why they were blessed so much, because it wasn't an insular faith, but it was a faith that had to be shared with other people.
So obviously this missionary aspect was a part of what the Waldenses were focusing on. But you said they had a particular faith and they were being persecuted for it. What were the aspects of their faith that were distinct from the mainstream church at the time? And what was it that attracted the ire of the church?
I think one of the biggest things that attracted the persecution that came down to them was a refusal to recognize the papal church structure. That was around, the papal church structure is very kind of hierarchical, top down. You got the Pope and the bishop, archbishops and bishops and so on. And they didn't follow that same structure. And they believed that the Bible and conscience was higher than earthly authority. And so there's a clash between those two different philosophies. One of them puts the Bible as the final answer in questions of faith, and the other one says, the final answer in questions of faith would be the authority of the church. And that kind of two huge different worldviews and philosophies clashed between the Waldensians and the church at the time.
And I read somewhere they actually translated the Bible into their own language. Is that your understanding?
It's true, yeah. They had the Bible in their languages, and
that was a big deal, wasn't it?
That was, and so they preserved the Bible in many ways. And when the Reformation kicked off, at least the 16th century Reformation, that kind of we refer to as the Reformation, and the Waldensians became aware of the larger movement of Christianity, I guess their gift to the Reformation was to give, a Bible. I believe it was in the French language. So they had kind of, they translated into the French, and that was something that they contributed to the wider Reformation picture. So they had the Bible before that they had preserved, painstakingly writing it out over the generations.
So the Waldenses, do you see them as a part of a wider pattern of dissidents, like either in their time? I mean, you mentioned the Albigenses, for example. Do you see them as sort of a part of a wider movement?
I think so. You've got, in the Bible, in Revelation 12, there's a phrase that's used that talks about the church, or the woman in the wilderness, or the church in the wilderness. And so during a time period when we refer to as the Dark Ages, when there was spiritual darkness across Europe, there were pockets of believers in different parts of Europe that were not necessarily connected to each other or even aware of each other, but in a sense they were the true church during that time, in the wilderness, kind of scattered, isolated, poor, persecuted. The Waldensians, they were northern Italy. The Albigensians were southern France. You had the Celtic Church, as I mentioned before, in Britain. The Paulicians were another group, and there was Christians even going as far down as modern-day Ethiopia. Yeah, the Abyssinians. So there were people scattered all over, and it's encouraging to read their stories and realize that even in times of immense spiritual darkness, God had a people that were preserving as best they could a knowledge of his word and, what had been handed down to them.
It's interesting you use the phrase as best they could. I mean, obviously none of these people were perfect. God revealed certain things to them. They were committed to certain things that they discovered in the scriptures. But are you suggesting that it's not as if they had found all the truth that is there to be found? There was sort of still work to be done.
Yeah, I think there was still work to be done. And, I wouldn't want to say that any of these people had a pure religion, so to speak. Using that in its strictest sense, I think they were striving to have a pure faith, but they were striving for that. But it wasn't a finished product then. It was still a work in progress.
Is it ever? Is it ever? I mean, surely the faith of all of us is a work in progress to some extent, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I think some of these groups, they may have been isolated. Communication wasn't what it was then. The printing press wasn't what it was then. So they had access and they had inherited some books and Bibles and so on, but it wasn't maybe as complete as it is today. And not even to say that today it's fully complete, but they were doing the best they could, and God honored their faithfulness.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the printing press, because of course in the 16th century there, Johann Gutenberg, came up with the movable type printing press in Europe, and basically,
game changer.
Basically it went viral from that point. Like that was the cutting edge technology at the time, and it was the technological engine that sort of drove the Reformation. Now, you're telling the Reformation story on YouTube, which is interesting. Using today's sort of viral media. But the story itself, do you think these stories of, the Celtic Church, the Waldenses, the, people running around in the mountains and in the Dark Ages, how is that relevant for people in today's world?
I think the relevance of history is the lessons that come from the history and the applications we pull from history. That's what makes it relevant. So the stories isolated from our lives, they don't really have much relevance. It's interest, and it's kind of, that's an interesting point. I think once we make an application from history, that's what really drives it home and answers the question, well, what's the big deal? Well, there's an application we can pull from that. And it's encouraging to see people who've gone, experiences we may be going through as individuals today, we may be going through as a church today, to see, well, these things have happened in the past. People have gone through these situations, they've gone through these circumstances, and that stands as an encouragement for us today. In that sense, I think it is relevant, because it can be inspirational, it can be encouraging, it can give courage when we may feel down. Well, this person went through this experience. This is what enabled him to get through it. Yeah. And, this is what can encourage us today as well.
And have you found that to be the case as you've developed and produced and been releasing this Lineage Journey video series? Have you found that people are encouraged by it and that they're responding to it? Like what sort of feedback have you got?
It's been very positive. It's interesting, going back to one of the earlier questions you had about young people in history. It's interesting, the highest demographic of viewers on Facebook is actually young men between the ages of 13 and 17.
Interesting.
Even though the people who like our page, the highest demographic, I think, is 25 to 35. But the people who watch the videos, the highest demographic is basically teenage boys.
There you go. What do you think it is about the content that grabs that demographic in particular?
I think it's factual. It's kind of presenting a short, concise episode of history in just like 4 or 5 minutes. And I think it answers that question. The big questions in life are, where do I come from? Why am I here? And, where am I going? And I think these videos and anything that kind of tries to look into our past is answering the question, where do I come from? And even though people may not articulate that, it's a deep burning question that all of us most likely we have. Where do I come from? We wonder where we come from in terms of our family. We ask our parents, who was our grandparents, and what's my family heritage? But we also have that same question when it comes to our spiritual heritage as well. Who are we today and where do we come from?
Yeah. And I guess the production values might have something to do with it too, because obviously, that it's fairly fast moving. The music is, pretty good. The drone footage, man. I mean, that's some beautiful, aerial views of some, incredible historic places. That really does add something to it. I think, that's one reason why I know I enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, when we first did the videos, I thought the videographer was going to stick a camera in front of my face and record that and stick it straight online. When when I saw the first episode, I was like, oh, wow, he's a little bit more involved, But, he knows what he's doing, and because it's social media and people are scrolling through Facebook, you need it to be fast and quick in the first, 4 or 5 seconds to try and get people's attention, that they'll stop and watch a bit longer. So, and I think that appeals to a younger audience as well, that, the quick images, the music to kind of grab the attention. So
yeah, no, that's great. So how many videos have you uploaded so far, and how many more are coming?
We uploaded 48 so far, that in terms of the standalone episodes. Actually, 49.
49. And then there's a sort of a like behind the scenes and extras and things like that on top of it.
There's about 5 or 6, maybe 7 behind the scenes videos, and we've got some 360-degree videos as well. So, for example, Martin Luther's house or some of the churches we've gone to, we've recorded 360-degree videos there, so people can kind of scroll around and look what that church or that room or that building looks like inside.
Oh, that's cool. Bit of a virtual reality sort of experience. Oh, that sounds great. Got any plans for new video or media projects?
Yeah, we're actually got a new series that's going to be coming out this year, starting in May, the end of May. We have a new series that will be coming out. There's going to be about another 50 or so videos that will come out that will kind of continue the journey of the expansion of Christianity in America and around the world.
Yeah, look, that sounds great. Hey, thanks so much, Adam Ramdin. We really do appreciate the time you've given us today to share a bit about that Lineage Journey video series and your passion for history and Reformation history in particular.
Thank you. It's been a privilege.
Now, if you'd like to know more about the stories of people who have kept biblical faith alive through the centuries despite all kinds of oppression and persecution, we have a special offer for you this week. It's the first time we've organised a giveaway for Signs of the Times Radio. If you're in Australia or New Zealand and you'd like a free copy of the book I mentioned earlier in the episode, Unshakeable Faith by Mark Finley, all you need to do is send us your name, your postal address, and the title of the book, which is, once again, Unshakeable Faith, to this email address, info@signsofthetimes.org.au. That's info@signsofthetimes.org.au. Thanks so much for listening. God bless. Catch you next week.
Today's episode was based on an article appearing in this month's Signs of the Times magazine. A subscription is just $26 for 11 issues a year. To find out more, visit signsofthetimes.org.au. Signs of the Times has been published in Australia since 1886 and is proudly produced by Adventist Media.
This is an Adventist Media podcast.